Hello everyone, this is the mod team from the Final Fantasy subreddit and special guest Dark Pixel Gaming. We are here to give you the first ever episode of our special podcast. This is a project that's been in the discussion for a long time, but we only recently actually started putting it together. We hope to get this out twice a month. We'll just be discussing a variety of issues and topics in Final Fantasy with hopefully guests, often, but not always. I am Dino Ken. The other mods and our guests introduce themselves.
I am MLAHK7. I think people here will just be calling me M because that's kind of a mouthful. But yeah, happy to be here. I'm excited for our first episode of the podcast.
All right, good stuff. It's Lil Vaughn, or just Vaughn for the duration of the podcast. Really excited to get this thing off the ground, and yeah, it's gonna have a good time.
Also, shouts out to Michael Kelley for providing the sensual sounds for today's podcast. You may know him as the composer for the critically acclaimed Valhalla and the upcoming Yuppie Psycho. So yeah, go check his stuff out.
And my name is Mike from Dark Pixel Gaming on YouTube. Glad that you guys had me on for your first episode. That's really cool.
Glad you could make it.
So, Mike, you're from Dark Pixel Gaming, right? You want to talk about your channel real quick before we delve into the meat of our discussion?
Sure. So yeah, Dark Pixel Gaming. I actually started out doing YouTube under another channel before then, where I started doing these Final Fantasy retrospective / reviews, and eventually kind of migrated over to the Dark Pixel Gaming channel, which is an affiliate of what our main channel was at the time, Dark Pixel, where we did visual effects and filmmaking and short skits and parodies and that sort of thing. But we've put a lot more focus on the gaming channel in the last year and a half or so, so it started to grow quite a bit. And for the most part, I grew up playing RPGs, JRPGs, Final Fantasy, and Suikoden, and Golden Sun, and all kinds of games like that. And so, you know, I just wanted to kind of create a channel where I did deeper analysis of that genre, something that is just really, I don't know, for me, very personally interesting to talk about and to analyze. So that's basically what I do on my channel. And there's a lot of Final Fantasy,
So that's Dark Pixel, Mike from Dark Pixel. Yeah, so we were going to discuss today, introduction a bit, settings across the franchise and how they differ and how they've evolved from, Cornelia and Final Fantasy 1 to the world of Final Fantasy 15, if you will.
The universe with all the different, facets to 15.
Yeah, I think the planet's called Eos, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah.
Eos, something like that. But from Symbol Cornelia and the extended world of 1. Did 1 have a name? Was it Gaia? Was it Terra?
I don't remember if the actual planet in 1 has a name. I know, the country is called Cornelia because, well, that's the name of the kingdom. But I don't remember if there's an actual name for the country. I guess you could always check on the wiki or something. But yeah, I guess for the purpose of the conversation, we'll just refer to Final Fantasy 1's world as Cornelia. Keep it simple.
Yeah, it doesn't look like the planet had a name in 1. Yeah,
I think only like a handful of them have names. Like I think both 9 and 7 are called Gaia.
10 is obvious because I say it every 5 seconds.
Mira.
Final Fantasy IV's world is called Earth, so no confusion there.
Alright. What about 2 and 3?
2 and 3 I think are just the worlds of 2 and 3. 5 has World A and World B.
And World C, spoilers.
Oh yeah, slight spoilers, is a World C, which is just A plus B.
Before we move any further, just going to go ahead and throw this out. There's basically going to be spoilers for every mainline game, more or less, maybe even some of the side games, since we'll be, going back and forth talking about all of those. So, if anyone does want to be spoiled on the intricacies of each Final Fantasy world, then it may be best to turn away now.
Yeah, it's probably a good disclaimer to have. We should put that up in the title.
Spoilers abound.
Yeah, I think the world of Final Fantasy 1 is just called, World... It looks like World A. Oh no, that's the Dissidia world. Just World. But
Alright, see, that's a whole nother discussion. When you want to talk about one, you have to talk about, are we talking about one plus Dissidia or just one? Because it's kind of interesting what they did with Dissidia, with how they kind of Dissidia technically sort of takes place within the time loop that's caused by Garland and Chaos, but like I said, I think just for simplicity's sake, we'll leave out the Dissidia aspects of one.
yeah, they've attempted to do stuff with 1 over the years, but 5, yeah, anyway, back to naming our worlds. 5, I think, was World A, B, and C, or 1, 2, and 3, I can't remember. 6 had World of Balance and World of Ruin. 7 was Gaia, 8 doesn't have a name, 9 was Gaia and Terra, 10 is Spira. I don't know 11's name because I didn't play the MMOs, but I know it has one. 12 is Evilus, 13 is Cocoon, or Pulsing Cocoon, and 14 has no name.
Nah, 14's name is Heidelin.
Heidelin. Yeah, so at least they've started naming their worlds as time has gone by.
Yeah. Yeah, but before we dive into the discussion, I guess maybe we'll see the meat of the discussion later. How about we get into some of the more recent juicy news and details on some of the more current stuff with 15?
Oh yeah, with 15, with all the leaked DLC Season 2 rumors, besides episode Arden, which we know about.
Like I said, Arden sounds like it'll be pretty obvious. Well, let me rephrase it. It's obvious that we would be getting a episode Arden when they start talking about Season 2.
Well, I think that's the one they officially announced, was episode Arden.
Yeah, Arden was the one that was officially announced, and I think Arden will be interesting because I don't believe that you'll be seeing, in my opinion, I think the most interesting aspect to Arden is the things he was doing before 15. Like, as you go through 15, they have like these little storybooks that you can pick up along the way, and they kind of detail, I guess, the mythical aspect of Arden and all of the other, and the Star Scourge and all that. So I'm hoping that 15 goes into detail on, he was originally a king of Lucian, or one of the first kings, if not the first king. And there was some whole betrayal aspect, not super versed in 15, but if any one of you have, I guess, better insight into that, then yeah, I think that'll be kind of neat.
From what I understand of Arden's story was he was the first king of Lucius, and he had the Oracle's role and the King of Lucius's role, and he was curing the Star Scourge, but he became like too popular and the people hated him, or something happened and the gods turned against him. I don't know specifically.
Yeah, essentially what happens is he absorbs the Star Scourge into himself, and because that happens, the crystal rejects him as the king of the realm and chooses a second person in his stead. So he was part of the Lucius Caelum dynasty, or their bloodline, but he was rejected by the crystal to become the king because he had absorbed the Star Scourge and it had changed his nature. And so because of that, he was rejected and he became bitter and wanted revenge on the Lucius Caelum.
I mean, I'd be bitter too.
Yeah.
All kinds of salty.
Oh yeah, that's why I'm like really interested in his story, because I feel like I don't know what it was about Arden. Like, I thought he was a really good villain. I don't know if it was the voice actor that did it for me, because he had a really amazing voice actor, but I mean, I know people talk about missed opportunities in that game a lot. I really think he was one of those missed opportunities. Like, you really don't get to see his backstory at all. It's explained all in one cutscene with like music over it. You can't even like hear what he's saying. Like, I think an episode Arden is very sorely needed. So I'm excited to see what's in this one. Yeah, I'm excited when it got announced. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I agree with that to a large extent. This is actually something that I made a video on my channel, was the fact that, like, in terms of lore and story content, Final Fantasy 15 has a lot of fascinating stuff. It's just a matter of that the way that story is told, they do a lot of telling rather than showing. So they'll sort of like just have him explain things in a cutscene, and a lot of times it feels a little bit vague, and it just doesn't.
Kind of did that in response to like the criticism with 13, because everyone was saying, "Oh, it's like a movie, and like you don't really get to do anything." So they took that feedback and they just kind of took out like all the cutscenes in 15 and left you with really almost nothing. And as a result, it's like it's hard to understand the story. I mean, no one likes to sit through long cutscenes, but I think sometimes it's necessary to have just those cutscenes that you have to sit through in order to just understand basic plot points and characterization. Yeah. Like when you strip that off, even like you really end up with not much left.
I think one of the worst examples is chapter 13 when
oh god,
you end up the big building in Niflheim, and at one point you're just running up through the stairwells and through the rooms, and you just have Arden blasting exposition at you over the loudspeaker, and it's so like I know a lot of people really enjoy Arden as a villain. For me personally, I'm not a fan of him.
Yeah, I thought it was a little lackluster, to be honest.
I know you mentioned earlier that you liked his voice acting. I think his voice acting is fine. I think it's a little, for me personally, it's a little over the top. And another side note, any Overwatch fans out here, he shares the same voice actor as Reinhardt as well.
I love Reinhardt, and that's weird.
I love Reinhardt too, but like, it's funny because you hear the two different voices. You've got they're both very over the top now that I think about it. But they're just. I guess it's
about like bias in 13. Like everyone is always like, "Oh, I love his voice actor; it's so great." But to me, like, don't get me wrong, like he's a good voice actor, but it was very, very dramatic and.
Brian is amazing. How dare you?
How do you like his voice? How do you like his voice as Kain though in Dissidia and also in Final Fantasy IV?
I haven't heard him as Kain yet. So.
It's been a while since I heard him as Kain, but doesn't he sound pretty much the same? If I'm remembering right,
he's very recognizable. Yeah, I think the difference, and I actually haven't played all the way through the 13 sequels myself. But I think that a lot of it comes down to voice direction more so than like the performance choices. But I thought he was great. I thought he was great as Kain. In FF4, the 3D remake on the DS that's now on Steam and mobile phones and stuff. I think he's really, really strong there.
I do like him as Kain.
Beast and Nier as well. I'm playing through the first Nier now. I played through Automata earlier, and he plays his voice as well. And it's like you said, voice direction plays a major part because he's got this really, like, if you think he's already kind of over the top a little bit as Caius, he takes it even further as the ancient book voice. It's so good.
Yeah, it's also the dialogue too. Like, if you have really dramatic dialogue, like. It's hard to
the writing.
Do that.
Writing is a bit suspect in the 13 games for sure.
Oh yeah.
Right. 13 loves his drama.
Yeah, it's very like monologue-y. All three games are like that, but I noticed it. I think more with Caius, just because like he's very like a dramatic voice actor. But with all the characters, all their dialogue is very over dramatic and monologue-y, and not something that someone would actually ever say in like a conversation or real life. 15, I think, is a little bit better in that regard. It was more natural.
15, I feel like they took all the criticisms from 13 and just did the exact opposite to the other extreme end. Like, instead of the hallway that's very decorated and very pretty, you have this big, bland, open world. Instead of a bunch of unlikable, really deep developed characters, you have 4 really likable, very bland characters. Like, it's the opposite of 13.
I feel like they've been doing that since 12 too, because the lack of character development in 12 and the more focus on like the larger plot, they just totally reversed that for 13, and they focused like entirely on the characters' internal struggles and very little on explaining or building its world and that sort of thing. And like how open 12 was, and with the gambit system and all the customization, they like really streamlined that for Final Fantasy 13's battle system. I feel like they're over responding to fan criticism, and that even in some of the at least the image that you posted here for the Final Fantasy 15 rumors, it seems like the person who is sort of like leaking this or whatever, quote unquote, possibly or maybe not, is alluding to that as well, which I think falls in line with like the mindset of Square, is that they're hearing all this feedback and they're trying to like overcorrect for it so hard that they go way too far in the other direction, and they overcorrect back the other way again.
Yeah.
It's funny, I've been doing this recently with 14 as well. It really started with 14. Because, I don't know if any of us here have played 1.0, but we all know about the disaster that was 1.0.
Oh yeah, it ruined Square Enix.
Yeah, someone who's been subscribed to the MMO since the relaunch, the fact that they took that criticism and turned it on its head, man, 14 it's easily one of my favorites in the franchise. And I'd say, as far as, what Yoshida has done with taking that fan criticism and turning it around and turning it into something positive, he's done a great job with it. But then they try to do the same thing with some of the single player games. We would get the active time reports, similar to what 14 got, 14's live letters. And I feel like you said, they're overcorrecting with it as far as 15 and the newer game, the other games go. And I feel like you kind of have to have a balance. Like, when it comes down to fan feedback, it's important to listen to your fans, but it's also important to keep your own personal vision, steady as well, so you know where you're going. And
right.
I feel like with 15, they had this roadmap for this romantic road trip that was created as part of the fan feedback, and I think it definitely ended up losing its way, and also losing out on what felt like a year of development. Now that we're here where we are, finally getting playable versions of all the party members, and hell, maybe even possible online co-op for the main campaign. I think that as far as listening to that fan feedback, as it's definitely done good for them, but at the same time, you can play the game and you can tell, well, they tried a little bit too hard in some places.
I think in them releasing this episode Arden and all like the DLC episodes, I mean, this was almost like a direct result from that survey they sent out, where they were like, oh, what else would you like to see in the game? And now all these extra DLCs are coming out. I think it's a way of them trying to like rectify whatever mistakes they feel they made, or they really do. Like, I don't want to say they're obsessed with fan feedback, but I think like as a company they take it to heart a little more than a lot of other gaming companies. So yeah, I mean, it's gonna be interesting to see how it's how people see episode Arden, because some people already are saying like, oh, can we just move on already? And then other people are like,
yeah, I want them to work on 16. 15 I feel like it's done. It doesn't need like 3 years of post-development time. Like,
as far as you said you want to see 16 yet, the next big Final Fantasy will be the 7 remake. So I'm not expecting to see 16 for like another 6 or 7 years.
God, I know, but 15 was so long in between 13 and.
You're right. How about episode Luna Freya? The leaks also suggested Luna Freya episode, and they also suggested they want that Square wants people to view Luna Freya in the same light as other. With 10 and 7, Yuna and Tifa didn't need any extra DLC to make them great, likable characters. But then, how do you guys feel about Square trying to...
Yeah, I mean, Luna literally, like, you meet her and then she dies, and then you're like, okay.
Yep.
And that's the end.
We're supposed to care about her so much, but, like, you don't see her until she's dead.
And, like, it would have helped if they had flashbacks or something. But
yeah, I had a lot of conversations about this with people, and the idea, from what Tabata has suggested, is that they wanted to really make the story just from the point of view of Noctis. Now, I think that already is suspect, because they had several scenes where they jumped out of his perspective and they'd show Yuna doing things, and they'd show... Even if that was the intention, it just makes it hard to make that scene something that hits you emotionally. Now, from what people who really enjoy it have been telling me, it's not the idea that there's a loss of someone that you loved and someone that you cared about deeply, as much as it is the loss of an opportunity to get to know someone who you revere and respect. And so that was a perspective that, I found pretty interesting. Like, I think a lot of people look at it and they say like, oh, I didn't get a chance to meet her. How can I care about this person when she's dead? Or when she's taken away? But I think the idea they were going for, while not perfectly executed, in my opinion, was that they sort of built her up to be this figure that people revere across the world, and someone who Noctis looks up to, and who he spent very little time with as a child, but sort of had this admiration for and saw this as an opportunity to become close to this kind of person who maybe he saw as having strengths where he was weak. And then that opportunity, when he finally had it in his hands, was taken away from him. And I think that that's kind of what they were going for. But again, I think the execution of the story in 15 is the problem more than it is the ideas or the content specifically.
I think Square in general has a problem with how they tell their stories. Like, the stories are always really good, but the way they go about it's always weird.
Yeah.
Like, it's no secret among our staff that I'm a huge 8 fanboy. And 8 has an amazing story, but it's just told so poorly. Like, a lot of the characters, you don't get to know them, but, like, they have such depth. It's really... It's this problem Square has had for a long time, and I think 15 just made it really evident.
Yeah. I was actually having a conversation about this a little bit earlier, but, people sort of, especially longtime fans of the series, they have this sort of expectation of, like, what kind of story or the style of storytelling that they want from Final Fantasy that I think was so embedded in the way Sakaguchi directed. And, a lot of people say, well, Final Fantasy 6 and 7 were not directed by Sakaguchi, but he was in a producer role, not executive producer role, but producer role, where I was actually just reading some interviews with him today where he said he basically was still making a lot of the creative decisions in Final Fantasy 6 and 7. And in Final Fantasy 8, he moves to executive producer. He's no longer quite in the middle of things in terms of those creative decisions there, because he was working on Spirits Within movie. He was branching off to produce Final Fantasy 9 at the time. And so Final Fantasy 8, I think there's a pretty strong contrast in storytelling technique and style that you're talking about.
You can also see it with, like, the way the characters will pass out and you play as Laguna and company.
Sure.
Years and years later, or beforehand, which I think is another, once we get into it later, will be another very interesting thing to talk about as far as settings go as well.
Yeah. And so I think that when Sakaguchi departed during the development of Final Fantasy 12, and the fact that he was not involved creatively in Final Fantasy 10 or Final Fantasy 8's development, you start to see this discrepancy in the, again, not quality, I'm not talking about whether or not it's good or bad, just in the style of the way the stories were told. And that has sort of continued, and I feel like they've had many directors since then, and they're sort of trying to find this balance between the strengths and weaknesses of these different directors. Motomo Toriyama, he co-directed 10, but then also the 13 trilogy, right? You see his style in both games, I think. They're very similar in a lot of ways. And then you have, the different, Tabata is very different. And so it's a matter of, I think they lost this sort of like central philosophy that Sakaguchi brought to the franchise as the creator of it. And when he left, they've been sort of experimenting and trying to find what's going to work for us narrative-wise in style and everything moving forward.
I can definitely see that.
Yeah, they're able to find their mark, as far as that goes, because, with looking at the stories of 15 and 13, they both have, I think we can definitely point out, it's a lot easier to point out their weaknesses when comparing to something like 7 or 8, where it's a lot easier to point out their strengths, fortunately.
Yeah.
So how about moving on a little bit? How about we've got episode Ignis coming up, and the Comrades came out last week. Has anyone here gotten a chance to dabble in Comrades, or are we looking forward to Ignis? How'd y'all feel about that Ignis trailer?
I haven't seen it yet, honestly. And Comrades,
really? It's so rad. Like, when I saw it, dude, I was mad, honestly, when I saw the Ignis trailer, because it looked so much closer to the Final Fantasy 15 reveal that we saw years ago with Leviathan attacking the city and seeing Noctis hop from building to building. That's what Ignis was doing in this trailer. And it looks in this DLC, from what they've shown, it looks so much closer to that than what we actually got. So I was actually, I was livid when I saw this, because I felt like these were the promises that were made all those years ago, and now it's being sold separately. Granted, I'm a little bit softer on that point now that they're adding so much more, like the character swapping and all the new cutscenes. But dude, at the time, it just looks so good. Ignis even has like this Batman-esque grappling hook where he's able to hop on top of these buildings and move from building to building. I'm super excited for it.
Yeah, I really liked the trailer too. I thought the trailer was really well put together, and I've had a lot of criticism of 15's storytelling, since it came out. But I think the trailer was extremely well directed. If you haven't seen it, I mean, there's what many people would consider a pretty big spoiler there in terms of explaining even, or at least alluding to the reason why he lost his sight.
Right.
So if you want to avoid that, then you shouldn't watch it. But otherwise, I think that it like you said, Levon, I think it delivered on a number of places where I was expecting the main game to dive into a little bit, especially with the ring of the Lucii and the Lucian kings. Like, like in Kingsglaive, when he puts on the ring and he goes before them and sort of like pleads his case, and they give him like the power for a limited time or whatever. I was expecting for that sort of thing to be explained and like delved into that mythology, that lore, I guess, of the world, and like it basically was not touched on almost at all until the very, very last scene of the game, basically in Final Fantasy 15. And so this is an opportunity, I feel like, for them to explore some of that and to explain, of all the party members, like their separate stories in FF15 where they get separated for a while. This is the one that I felt like the most I wanted to be in the game, because like Ignis shows up after the Leviathan scene and he's blind. It's like, oh, what happened to you? And like no explanation at all. It's just like they never talk about what happened. And so this is the one story of all of them that I'm most excited for.
I always just
oh, sorry. What were you gonna say?
I always just assumed Ignis went blind in the battle, like something, he got hit, or I just forgot about it and moved on the cause of his blindness.
Yeah, same. I think personally, episode Prompto had a lot of story that should have been in the original game. Like, for instance, I know he was the son of like one of the evil scientists or something like that, but that wasn't, I mean, you didn't know that if you just played the game. I think you find that out only in the DLC, and that's a pretty big deal. I mean,
well, there was that scene in chapter 13 where he just sort of shows up and he's like, "Hey guys, by the way, like, I'm actually from Niflheim," and they're like, "Oh man, so it's all good." But yeah, it's a delivery or a payoff for a storyline without any setup to it whatsoever. Like, it's just like what. Like
you have a few scenes where he's like, I'm like self-conscious, but that's it.
Right, when he was like,
he's like, hey, like I can open doors now, by the way.
Right, when he showed up and he's like, guys, I'm from Niflheim, can you ever forgive me? I was like, what the hell? Why wouldn't they? Like, where's this coming from? Like, from a narrative standpoint, I can get in universe why Prompto would feel that way, but like they did not set up that conflict at all.
Yeah,
exactly. Like they presented the conflict and then resolved it all within like 1 minute, and then they're like, okay, moving on. Like, it was so weird.
Yeah,
you could really feel the lack of budget in that very scene. Like, it was almost like watching the last 2 episodes of Evangelion again, where the entire thing is just cuts from the rest of the series. But yeah, it's unfortunate. But like I said, at this point, I feel like they've added enough free stuff to 15 to where it's maybe almost forgivable that they want you to pay extra for it, but still at the end of the day, even with it being cut out, it still feels, just vanilla 15 or base 15 still feels like those holes are still there.
Doesn't the PC version get all those DLCs for free, though?
I don't know if it'll be free. It depends, I guess, on what the base price of the game is going to be on PlayStation 4 when that comes out, right? Like, is Final Fantasy 15... like the PS4 version of the game still going to be $60 at the time? Because if so, I wouldn't think so. I don't think that they would launch a version that's $60 on PC that has like all that stuff included. But let's say it had dropped in price to like $40 or something like that. Then maybe I could see them as an incentive to get the PC version, including all of the extra DLC. But that does suck for all the people who paid, for the base game plus the Season Pass 1 and then a Season Pass 2, which is going to be an additional like $20, you know what I mean? That's a lot of money that you had to pay to get that stuff on PS4. So I hope that they price it at least to be more fair for their existing, player base.
Yeah, that was originally one of my biggest gripes. That I didn't buy the collector's edition. I bought the deluxe edition, which came with the steelbook case, a bit of DLC in the movie, and I felt a bit, I guess, gypped that I paid $90 and it felt like I got half a game. Like,
yeah.
With now they've a bunch of stuff, and by this point I had sold the game. I've sold the game months ago. So while all these things they're adding are amazing and makes me want to play it again, at the same time I don't really have the game again. So unless I actually threw down more money or borrowed it from a friend, it's like, well, all these updates might as well not exist. For people such as myself who no longer have it.
Yeah, I mean, there's something we said about the first experience you have with the game really leaves a lasting impression. So having gone through the game the first time and like it was a little bit underwhelming, like going back through it a second time is, I mean, it'll be nice having all the extra stuff, but it's really just not the same as being blown away the first time around and having that stick in your mind. And it really sucks that a lot of people, including myself, are never really going to get that from this game. Like, the impression has already been made. But,
right.
I mean, they're doing what they can for now, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's commendable. I think it's commendable that they're adding so much of it for free. Like the character swapping, vehicle being able to go off-road, extra scenes to sort of explain some of the lore of the Astrals in Chapter 12 on the train. A lot of things that they've added to it for sure. The whole scene where you follow Gladio and Ignis during Chapter 13 and sort of see a little bit more explanation about Lunafreya's brother. What's his name?
Ravis.
Ravis. Yeah, Ravis. They do a little bit more delving into like his motivations, like why he did anything he did.
He was such a disappointment.
It's commendable that they're doing a lot of that for free, but I certainly understand the disappointment people have with having to buy so much of the story separately. It makes a lot of sense that people would be turned off by that.
Now, how about Comrades? Does anyone here play Comrades?
I haven't played it yet. It's the one DLC I was actually interested in buying, but I just haven't had a chance to.
Yeah, same here. I'm actually not much of a multiplayer guy, personally. I tend to play games that are single player. I play for story, primarily. But it is something that, I definitely want to dive into soon. But, Mario Odyssey and Xenoblade 2 and a million other games around. And Final Fantasy 15 came out a year ago, you know what I mean? Like, there was a certain point where I kind of stepped away from it, and I was like, I'll wait for all of the DLC to be finished, and then I'll go back and revisit it then. So, I mean, I did play through the Gladio DLC and the Prompto one, and I'll probably play through Ignis, but I'll probably wait a little bit on Comrades.
Yeah.
I don't think it's for the best. I watched a little bit of the gameplay, and the gameplay looks actually improved over the main game, and there is a storyline to it. I watched some of the final boss stuff. I'm not going to spoil that for anyone here, but it definitely looks like something that if you were personally invested in the 15 story, from the get-go, then it's definitely something you're going to want to check out.
I was interested in it for the character creation. I love a good character creator.
Oh yeah, definitely.
What you said, ready to make your waifu in Final Fantasy 15?
Oh, totally. I usually just make a character loosely based on myself, but the waifu thing's always fun.
See, when I play an RPG that has character customization, like 14, for instance, I always make a female character, because if I'm going to be staring at a character for upwards of 100 hours, I'd prefer for it to be a chick, but, that's just me personally.
I've heard that so many times. It makes so much sense.
Yeah, I definitely get it.
Yeah, so moving on, how about the 7 rumors? We've gone over the 15 stuff, possibly having Lunafreya and Arden, but there's been some really interesting 7 leaks as well. Mike, we were talking about that earlier about possibly the game, the first episode possibly going as far as the boat ride to Costa del Sol. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, so I just want to say there have been a couple of 4chan leaks, and I think people are rightfully hesitant to believe much of what comes from 4chan. But the couple of them that have made some buzz, this one that you posted here, I think there is some fairly accurate conjecture going on. I think that the voice this person is using makes it suspect, especially since both in this one, there's actually another one, I don't know if you guys have seen, but essentially that one, it tries to pretend to be leaking way more stuff, like how the summons are going to work in the game, the fact that Final Fantasy VII Remake is going to take place in like an alternate universe from the original Final Fantasy VII, that there was going to be a whole separate enemy faction, enemies from the stars. There was like a whole lot of stuff that he was going over in that fake leak. But I think in both cases, what you have are people who are making 4chan posts. They're from 4chan, making 4chan posts for 4chan, and the way that they speak, I think, is suspect because in one case, they sort of allude to this fact that they've got all these Western developers working on the game, which is, I think, very, very easily disproved. I think the majority of the people working on the game are from Japan. And so if you were going to leak stuff like that and speak this way, it wouldn't be very hard to locate who the person is who's making this leak, if that makes sense. In the other one, the guy was talking about like, oh, I can't give you details on this or that because, I my job security. But then he would talk about specifically he's optimizing the engine. So his job is to make sure that Unreal Engine 4 is, so locating the one foreign guy, or even if it's a number of foreign guys who are working on engine optimization, you know what I mean? It's just a little bit self-contradictory. So I think that both of these leaks are fake for that reason. But I do think that a lot of what is said in this one that you're posting here, I think the one that got a little bit more buzz than the others, he does have some conjecture that I think is probably going to be pretty accurate. If they're splitting the game into 3 episodes, ending the first game on the ship as it sails away from Junon after you've defeated Genova Birth would be about a third of the way through the story of Final Fantasy VII. So if they're splitting it into kind of 3 equal parts, that seems to fall right in line with the truth. So I think that that's probably a good guess. Some of the other stuff he's talked about in here, a little bit more suspect, especially talking, the way he talks about CyberConnect 2 and stuff like that. I don't know. I just, he talks about like Tifa's figure as well, stuff like that. I don't think that any of that is to be believed, but that's just me.
So you don't think they're nerfing Tifa's assets?
I'm not saying it's impossible or that it won't happen. I'm just saying that the way this person is talking about it leads me to believe he has no idea what he's talking about. Because the other leak that I alluded to earlier was talking about how they're definitely not doing that. Like they're anyways, it's a very 4chan way of talking about SJWs and stuff like that, which I'd want to avoid talking about. But in any case, I think that none of these people know what they're talking about. I do think that you'll probably see from the move from the chibi look and the low poly look of the original game into a more realistic look. I do think that they will probably, I think maybe Dissidia or Advent Children is probably a good indicator of like how Tifa will look in the game. Not exactly, but that's a better indicator than expecting it to look like Tifa's more proportionate, taller model from the original Final Fantasy VII in the FMV cutscenes, for instance.
It's funny you mentioned the Dissidia model because I spent several hundred hours playing both Dissidia titles, and got Tifa down pretty well actually. And one of the more notable bits about her model is she has plenty of jiggle physics. Aesthetic model, which which for the PSP I thought was pretty on point, honestly.
When in the Dissidia with the PSP, when you had Tifa's cowboy costume, I thought it was going to be like, oh, they just did her cowboy costume as the adult version, but no, she just wears the same costume she did as a kid on her adult body. It's they know their audience.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good indication of what they'll do with Tifa in terms of the way she looks in the final game. So I don't think there's going to be much that's sort of beyond the realm of what we would expect from Square at this point.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if they tone things down a little bit, because she will be a lot more playable and visible in a full game like that, but I don't think they're going to like...
more action-oriented combat. She's going to be moving around a lot more compared to just standing in one spot and, attacking on turns. So when you've got a lot of that movement going on for characters busty as Tifa, it may actually be in the best interest to tone her down a bit.
Yeah, I think that's probably a pretty accurate thing to say. And it's actually a good point. The fact that the combat will be... Well, I mean, I guess Dissidia's is as well, but when you have a physics engine coupled with Unreal Engine 4, it's a little bit different than whatever they were using for the PSP. So,
yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah, also combat in Dissidia, you don't really get a good frontal look at characters because they're moving around so much and there's so much flashy stuff going on.
Yeah, explosions everywhere.
Yeah.
And I guess from what we've seen, I mean, this is a long time ago now, I'm sure that a lot has been improved upon or altered in some way in the combat system, but even the early showings they had of Final Fantasy VII Remake, there was kind of a lot of effects going on the screen, and Cloud was zooming around pretty quick. Because I know that they've said in interviews that they're sort of going for this, with the battle system, something that's not quite as fast-paced as the Dissidia games are, but that they're using that as sort of a baseline for, like, the way they're designing the battle system in Final Fantasy VII Remake. So I expect it to have a lot of similarities, or at least influences from that in terms of how the battle system will work. But yeah, we'll see. I mean, 30th anniversary of the game, right? This entire year we've been waiting for something.
Yeah, I'm surprised there's been no news so far.
No word at all. No word whatsoever.
Yeah, but what else is new from Square Enix? How long did we wait for even an announcement of Kingdom Hearts 3? Like, I have high hopes for Kingdom Hearts 3, but...
I agree that, first of all, that, the way they've sort of iterated on that battle system over time is certainly going to help and make Kingdom Hearts 3 an even better experience, And I also feel like they've handled the announcement of Kingdom Hearts 3 and sort of like its build up or its marketing a lot better than they have with the Final Fantasy VII Remake, personally. They announced it, it's in development, and that is what it is, but every time they've showed it, they've sort of like, they've showed you a lot of gameplay, they've given you an idea of what the game's going to feel like.
Right. They always show us something new every time, even if it's just something small, there's always a new tidbit.
Yeah, and I feel like with the 7 Remake, while they've done that a little bit, I think that they've been a lot worse. It's just in the way that they've sort of unveiled it, and the way that they've what they've showed. I think people are still feeling a lot like they're in the dark when it comes to Final Fantasy VII. Like, what is it going to be? How is it going to play? Like, all we've really had this year, for the entire year, is just a couple screenshots way back in the spring or whatever.
Right. We've only had, the announcement trailer, which was just them walking through Midgar and a little bit of gameplay, and then those couple screenshots, and that's it?
I don't even think that's real gameplay, because if you look at early gameplay for Final Fantasy 13 versus 13, Fantasy... None of those games look the way they did in those early gameplay trailers, and like, if you look back on it, it's very clear that was all like Square Enix Visual Works with HUDs just plastered on the screen. So honestly, I don't even think the gameplay we've seen so far is actual gameplay. And going even so far, the stuff going on with CyberConnect 2, they removed them from the game's development a couple months back. So that obviously has set them back by I don't know how far it set them back, obviously, because I don't work for Square Enix, but that's definitely put up some roadblocks and missed deadlines, etc., etc. So I feel like the reason we haven't seen as much is because they aren't very far, in my opinion, as far as the combat goes.
Yeah, I agree with that, and that's just again, I think that's how I think it makes it evident how much better they've handled Kingdom Hearts 3, despite the fact that people were starved for information for so long. When is it going to come out? At least they didn't announce it and then give you an idea of what it's looking like early in development, and then you get a game that's... I mean, they did that with FF15 too. Like, they announced it back in 2006 as Final Fantasy Versus 13, and then they showed you gameplay of Insomnia during the invasion, and then like, you don't get that in the final product. It's such a mistake, in my opinion, to announce a game so early on when it doesn't have like a solid foundation. Like, this is what the gameplay is going to be. This is how it's going to play. This is what we're covering in the story. We're only showing stuff that will actually show up in the game. And with Kingdom Hearts 3, I think they've done that, and I think that's the way it needs to be handled. So, with Final Fantasy VII Remake, whenever they decide to sort of unveil that again, I feel like we might see some key differences from what we saw in the early footage, and who knows how people will respond to that, you know?
I think it'll be a good showing for the 30th anniversary, which I want to get into now. We were talking about Dissidia earlier. Thinking back on it, Dissidia, the original PSP game, was actually part of the 20th anniversary. So now we're sitting at on the 18th. We're sitting at the 30th. So far for the 30th anniversary, there hasn't been much aside from some mobile games and wine. Mike, I know you've ordered some of that 30th anniversary wine. How's that taste, man?
No, that was not me. That was not me.
I've heard the 30th anniversary boxes were terrible.
Oh, really? Like, the quality of the boxes?
Well, it was like what, a cloud figure, and that was it.
Oh man. So like, how do you guys feel about the anniversary so far?
What anniversary?
Yeah, they haven't really done anything after that. Sort of doing this
I remember talking about this back in January, back at the beginning of the year, when because they announced that they were going to have an anniversary event that was supposed to kick off the 30th anniversary, which was going to be a whole year-long celebration. And I remember early, I was criticizing it, because I was like, how can you... I think it was on the day of the 20th anniversary of the release of Final Fantasy was the day that they had this first anniversary event. And I was sure that they picked that date for a reason, and that they were going to show something about the game. And they didn't, and so I, did a podcast next day or whatever it was, and, expressed my disappointment in the fact that we still haven't really seen much from FF7. And people were bagging on me because this is going to be an all-year thing. They're going to be doing announcements all year long. They're going to have all kinds of events and all kinds of stuff they're going to talk about. And it was like, okay, first of all, they're going to do that anyways. It doesn't matter if you call it an anniversary year or not. You're going to have events during the year where you're going to announce stuff that is coming out, like Final Fantasy, the Final Fantasy 12 remaster, and at E3 they had a pretty strong showing of Dissidia, and they're going to do that anyways.
Right,
So
that's not really...
It's a really bad excuse, first of all, and second of all, they haven't even done much.
Right.
In terms of unveiling stuff anyways. We're all the way at the end of the year now. We still haven't heard anything about FF7 Remake. What is going on?
Right, we got a ton of the Dissidia stuff, but that comes out in a month, and 15 has new content, and 12 came out this year. The World of Final Fantasy came out last year. 14 had an update, but that's all normal game development stuff.
You would have had that if this wasn't the 30th anniversary. Exactly the same way. They haven't done anything special for Final Fantasy's 30th anniversary, and they definitely have not done anything special for Final Fantasy VII's 20th anniversary, which I just find baffling. I cannot believe that.
At the very least, I expected a big collection of every Final Fantasy game for $150 or something like that, and you could just buy them all and have a format. But
yes, that would have been wonderful.
It would have been amazing. Why, Square? Why?
You should be used to it by now.
I don't know. at this point, there's Dissidia coming out, and Dissidia was the 20th anniversary thing. But then they're trying to do Dissidia for the 30th, which is weird because Dissidia doesn't come out till next year, so they've technically missed the anniversary. And if you want to get even more technical, Dissidia is an arcade game from 2 years ago. So they've mostly missed the mark on the 30th anniversary, unless you're just really enjoying that wine.
Just sipping on that wine.
And like,
That was
Dissidia was always going to come to the PS4. When they released it in the arcade, they're like, yeah, it's going to be on PS4 eventually. So even that's not like a brand new anniversary thing. It's just an eventuality that's finally happening.
Exactly. And that's kind of how I felt about everything that's happened this year. It's like, this would have been, this just feels like standard news releases or whatever, or press releases. None of this feels like this was designed for the purpose of celebrating the 30th anniversary of this series. And except for the wine, right? The wine is literally the only thing. Maybe a cloud figure somewhere or whatever.
Right, I think it was like a cloud figure, some like trading cards, and I think the official 30th box was a cloud figure, a couple like of the trading cards for the Final Fantasy trading card game, and like I think that's it.
Yeah, it just, like you were saying earlier, I think it's just literally mind-blowing that they did not have a package that had like all the games in one like box set for the PlayStation 4 or something. Like something like that would have been really, really cool to have. And it's baffling. It's baffling that they didn't do something like that for the 30th.
Because like they've ported 1 through 10 even onto every possible system imaginable. Like, why not just bundle them together? You don't have to do any work. Just put them on the same disc, slap a 30th anniversary sticker on it, and ship it out. People would buy it. I would have bought it. Like,
oh yeah, oh absolutely. There's no reason not to have done it.
Hopefully, they'll get it right for the 40th anniversary.
Oh god, it'll be so disappointing.
Maybe they'll get their act together.
It's just like the Metroid's 30th or 25th or whatever happened recently, and Nintendo just ignored it. They didn't even like make a mention of it.
Nope, nothing at all.
I remember there was like some fan art that I shared on Facebook. It was a picture of Samus with a party hat at a party all by herself, and it was just the saddest little image because I'm a pretty big Metroid Prime fan. I've never really got into the older games, but the Prime games they're on point. But at least 1 and 2 are. I mean, 1 and 3 are. But oh man, yeah, I don't know. I guess maybe Square forgot they had their dates wrong or something, and so maybe January rolled around. They're like, "Yo, do you know what day it is? It's the 30th anniversary. It's when?"
Oh man. Yep, that's very true. It was pretty disappointing.
Yeah.
A light show at I think it was their main office it was either their Osaka office or their Tokyo office. They had like this really cool light show where they had like these holographic images displayed like on the building. You can find it on YouTube if you search hard enough for it. So that was pretty neat. But yeah, as far as games go, nothing that it's like you said. There's nothing that we've seen that wouldn't have come if this wasn't the 30th anniversary.
Yeah.
It's really disappointing because like 13 is gonna turn 10 in a couple years, and like it's 2019. It'll be 10, I think. Right? Came out in 09.
That makes me feel so old.
Oh.
And like
That's crazy.
they're not gonna do anything for 13 either. Like,
I mean, who knows? Maybe we'll get a PS4 collection for the 313 games.
that might happen. I can see that one.
Yeah.
I think that's an inevitability at this point.
I'm honestly surprised they haven't done it yet.
Yep.
13 was streamable. You could stream the first game at least on PlayStation Now for a while, and then they have 13. Square Enix came out with their own streaming service that no one uses.
Of course.
Like iPad or whatever. And then when that came out, it got removed from PlayStation Now, which made me sad because I was like halfway through a playthrough at the time, and like I said, no one's going to use their iPad streaming service. No one wants to play 13 bad enough to have it on their iPad. I promise you.
Yep.
Yeah. Like I am less harsh on 13 than a lot of people, but I even struggle to consider replaying it. Like, I'm not gonna buy it for an iPad to try it. Like,
I can't imagine it would honestly run well on an iPad either. Because I have 7 on the iPad and it lags, and like 7 does not look as good as 13 does. I can't imagine playing 13 on an iPad. Maybe it's just my iPad, but
I think that's a Square Enix optimization issue. They just don't put enough effort into porting them and optimizing them for the platforms that they're going on. So a lot of the Steam versions were real bad on release as well, and they have to patch them a lot later. Like I remember
if they
when
patch them.
13 came out on Steam, it only ran at 720p for a long time. So yeah, that's a laziness issue on Square's part.
That's just an issue with Japanese companies in general. You know, as far as PC goes, a lot of them are really behind as far as getting their software onto Steam and GOG, really just on PC in general. So I feel like if we give them a little bit more time, because you know the Japanese can be a little adverse to change and with these sort of things, maybe they'll get their act together.
God, how long did it take Nintendo to come out with a competent online system? Like, we're on the Switch now? Yeah.
I don't think that's happened yet. I think they're still trying.
I think the only reason...
The Switch has so much potential, and it's just like, my goodness, like, come on, guys. You've got to figure this out by now, please. Please.
Yeah, I feel like the only reason the PlayStation works is because they have such a big American office. It probably has a lot of sway.
Yeah.
Probably. Because keep in mind, as far as PlayStation goes, it's Sony. So Sony, they dabble in everything from computers to phones. I was actually a big proponent of the Sony line of Xperia devices for a long time. I love the Xperia phones. So, you know, as far as all those, as far as online and other forms of technology goes, Sony, they can just borrow from their other divisions. But Nintendo, all Nintendo knows how to do is make games and playing cards. So
they did own a brothel at one point, like really early on. There was a Nintendo brothel. Like one of the first things that it was a brothel. Fun fact.
Kaysen, who's one of the other guys who does videos on my channel, he has a series called Dark History, and he goes over some of that, like a lot of the really underhanded stuff in the Japanese game industry, especially early on, like back in the 80s and early 90s and stuff. With Konami and Nintendo with owning the brothel. Yeah, there's a lot of shady stuff going on there.
Yeah, it's a lot of shady stuff going on today with our loot boxes, and it's not gambling, guys. It's not. Don't worry about it.
Oh man, let's not even get into that. Oh boy.
Yeah, we've gotten so far off track of the settings of Final Fantasy.
Well, I think that's next up on the list. So yeah, let's move into that.
All right.
As far as settings go, you know, like we mentioned earlier, it's such a wide breadth of what you can get nowadays with Final Fantasy, because I think just real quick, what was everyone's first game? Mine was Dissidia, so it doesn't count. So for just, you know, to see where everyone stands is what is their base. What was everyone's first game?
I started with 8. 8 was my first.
mine was 10.
Mine was 7. Like many
7?
other people. Yeah.
Okay, all right, yeah. So a lot of us are, like I said, my first one was Dissidia, but outside of Dissidia, mine was it 7? It was 7. I played 7 and 13 basically at the same time. But yeah, so for a lot of us, when we think of Final Fantasy, we started with what a lot of people like to refer as the golden years games, which had closer to modern settings. And so for, you know, a lot of us, this is something we should definitely go into later, another episode. For a lot of people, your first Final Fantasy game is kind of what sets your expectations and stuff for the rest of the series. When you start with 8 and you start with things like drawing magic and stealing magic from enemies, where to a lot of other people that seems odd, that becomes the norm for you. So when you start with 10, like Emily has, and you see a lot of the Eastern influences, and then you go to something like, say, 4,
which is medieval fantasy.
Exactly. Or you go to 13, which was my first mainline game, which is has some more futuristic settings early on. It can be a bit jarring. So how do you guys feel about that? Why do you think Square Enix has decided to go so far in so many different directions as far as settings go?
Well, again, I think it falls onto Sakaguchi. We talked about this a little bit earlier too, how his absence has sort of left the company sort of trying to find an identity for Final Fantasy again. But he has always despised the idea of sequels. He does not like, staying stuck in sort of like the same world or using the same ideas over and over again. His entire philosophy is that you push yourself to try something new every time. And Final Fantasy very much embodied that all the way up through Final Fantasy X, when he was still, basically heading it up. He was at the charge of it all. Around the time that the turn of the century happened, Yuichi Wada became the president of the company. The Spirits Within was a horrible financial failure, and Sakaguchi was a lot of the blame was put on him, as well as the president at the time. I forget his name. But Yuichi Wada was pushing very much for reusing existing assets to create sequels at a low cost to maximize profits, which is why you get Final Fantasy X-2 right around that time. That's why you get 3 Final Fantasy 13 games, right? As soon as Sakaguchi leaves, that begins to happen. And so his entire philosophy was like, again, let's try something totally new with every single one. There's pros and cons to that, obviously. What you're alluding to a little bit earlier was how everyone's kind of first game is the one that they see as like the ideal Final Fantasy. That's very often true, and it's what Tabata refers to as Final Fantasy disease, right? Everyone has their own idea of what Final Fantasy should be, and it's different because all those games were so different. And so you have a divided player base, you have a divided fan base, you have even divided developers within the company who have different ideas of what that should be. And so that has caused some problems for even the development team in developing new Final Fantasy games. But at the same time, you get something really new and fresh and unexpected with each game as well. And that's sort of what the identity of it was and why it was so appealing. I think that's the reason why the settings and the stories are so diverse, especially 1 through, well, all of them, but especially during the Sakaguchi years. I think that was entirely his, driving philosophy behind it.
I think part of it...
Setting heard so far.
Oh, my favorite setting? Oh,
Yeah.
It's hard to say. I'm very much into medieval fantasy, personally. I really, really like it. I'm a huge Tolkien nerd. I read the Silmarillion like 1 billion times and Lord of the Rings and stuff like that. So I'm very much into fantasy settings. So Ivalice, I would say, is probably my favorite Final Fantasy world. Especially Final Fantasy Tactics. Like, I think that's my favorite story in the series, but I definitely appreciate the attempts to do a fantasy story inside of a more modern or postmodern and maybe even futuristic setting, like Final Fantasy 7 and 8 and 13 and 15. I really liked 15's world. Final Fantasy 15's world to me felt like if you were to take, let's just say, Final Fantasy 1's medieval world, but then you go in thousands of years in the future to what is the equivalent of the modern day. So you have these landmarks and magic and kingdoms, but you have all of this familiar sort of technology sort of enmeshed in that. And so I love the idea, and I think it was executed pretty well for the most part in terms of its design and its look. So I have a lot of worlds in the Final Fantasy series that I really, really enjoy, but I would say Ivalice, just for my personal tastes and my traditional medieval fantasy, is probably my favorite.
Ivalice is a good setting. I think mine would be Spira, because it was very unique and went away from a lot of tropes. It was post-apocalypse, but the apocalypse wasn't war or disease. It was a giant kaiju that destroyed the world, and that was really neat. That there was ruins and technology everywhere, and people had access to it, but they chose not to use it. And I just thought it was really a very unique setting, and I appreciated it a lot. It was very island and water focused, which I don't think any Final Fantasy since or before had ever done, which I thought was neat.
Yeah, that was actually something Kitase, the director, was really looking to do with 10, is he was trying to like redefine what a fantasy setting could be, because they had some backlash from 7 and 8 about like, oh, this isn't fantasy, this is science fiction. And he sort of like took that, and rather than being like, okay, let's make a medieval fantasy setting again, he was like, no, I want to like open people's minds to what fantasy can mean. And so a lot of their inspiration came from the Okinawan Islands in Japan, and from sort of like its history and culture, rather than from the European medieval history.
Yeah, I really like that it's based on other things, and I kind of wish that more of the settings would be based just on other cultures and other things. Like, I've been very adamant in our chats and subreddits that I want like a Western cowboy themed Final Fantasy. Just that, yeah, it'd be awesome. I think it would really work well with Final Fantasy, with some like gunslinger characters and stuff. But it's like a different kind of
Irvine.
yeah, Irvine, and throw some Native American analogs in there and some rough and tumblers, and you got yourself a Western. But like a different style setting with a different theme instead of medieval fantasy, or like some type of weird Asian new fantasy or sci-fi, or
Yeah, that would be definitely very, very different. I'd be open to that.
Now, Emily, you said your first game was also 10. Now, compared to other games you've played, how do you feel like some of the strengths of Spira play out versus something like 7, where it's more modern, or what's the word I'm looking for? Steampunk. Well, I wouldn't say 7 steampunk. I'd say 6 is probably close to steampunk.
Yeah.
7, I think, would be cyberpunk, if anything.
I think, in my opinion, 10 is my favorite game. So, going on with your theory about how your first is most likely your favorite, I'm kind of in that bucket too. So I do think that, in my opinion, 10 was my personal favorite world, and I just kind of like how they went in a different direction with it. Sometimes it's hard to imagine what a story could be like, or what a world could be like when you think of fantasy. You just think of medieval, or I feel like with Final Fantasy they're constantly trying to redefine what fantasy is, and whenever they take a really big leap, it, in my opinion, tends to work out for the better. Like, for instance, I think up until Final Fantasy 6, some of the worlds were different a little bit, but I haven't played 4 or 6, but I've played 1, 2, 3, and 5, and they're all pretty similar in terms of the setting. But once they got to 7, they took a huge leap and went the sci-fi route, and it worked out really well. And I think that kind of gave Square the opportunity to kind of jump off and realize, hey, we can actually be creative with the worlds we make for these games. And from then they tried to do 8, and then they went back to medieval with 9, and then did post-apocalyptic with 10. I really think the reason Final Fantasy has been able to be so successful with having a different world for each game, a different setting, I really think Final Fantasy 7 should really kind of be credited with that. That's my personal opinion, just because if Final Fantasy 7, if Final Fantasy 7 had been a failure, I think that Final Fantasy 8 would have been a medieval game. They would have gone back to the old formula, because Final Fantasy 7 was so successful. They were more confident. This is just my personal opinion. I think it made them a little bit more confident to being open and being creative with the worlds they put out in these games.
I can see that, because there's a lot of inconsistency with 8's setting. So you can see they didn't know, how they wanted the end thing to be, because, you have 1940s era tech next to, super science fiction tech next to, standard modern day tech. It's really weird.
Yeah, for sure. I think even Final Fantasy VI in a lot of ways was sort of the first step in that direction, where it was in more of a Jules Verne-ish sort of steampunk setting. But I think that they, like you were saying, they really dove headfirst for Final Fantasy VII in terms of doing something radically different for what's expected of a fantasy setting. And it really paid off. And I think that's the reason why the majority of the games that have come since then have been in a kind of a more science fiction. They've been influenced more by science fiction elements for the most part.
And I think I think if anything, also, I mean, I know 15 is not is not a Final Fantasy 7 by any means, but I think that opened up a pretty big door too, because we've never had a Final Fantasy game that's been so like meta, I guess, in terms of its connection to the real world and actually feeling like it's almost kind of like a familiar place that we would see here on Earth. I don't know. Like, I think it opened up a new door with Final Fantasy 15 and their setting. So I really think that, you know, I mean, 7 was a jumping off point, but ever since then, every game since 7 has been pretty diverse in the setting and the world. So, I mean, 10's still my favorite, though, just because, you know, 10's the best. It's my favorite game. I love Spira. Spira's great. And I hope that one day they'll revisit the post-apocalyptic theme, because I thought that was really cool, and 10's the only game really that did that. So I wouldn't mind them revisiting that one.
Yeah.
6 had post-apocalyptic, and we've already opened spoilered up, so when Kefka destroys the world, and the party has to pick up the remnants. And 7 was on the track to being an apocalypse, but yeah, 10's the first full post-apocalypse. And it's like, not post-apocalypse, where everything is like in ruins, but it's like thousands of years after the apocalypse, where things are starting to regrow.
It's like an entirely new civilization being birthed from a world that's been largely forgotten. And I think I agree that is a big appeal to Spira as a world and as a setting. There's a lot of mystery there, you know, a lot of lore that you can sort of incorporate to sort of like give this sense of depth to the world. Sure.
Right, because like the ancient ruins are like modern day buildings, and like the towns are ancient towns. It's a very neat dynamic. I can't talk.
Yeah,
for sure.
I think something that's unique about Spira also is that, and off the top of my head, I can't think of any other games that have done this, but it's the only world really where it's just in a constant state of destruction, and you see it throughout the game. And I think with most Final Fantasy games, it's like the destruction is like what you're trying to prevent, or it's like you know, imminent. But with Final Fantasy X, it's like it's already happening, and it's happening constantly throughout the game, and it's been happening for, you know, thousands of years. And so yeah, like it's kind of a society that, while yes, it's post-apocalyptic, people have been dealing with it for so long that it's almost like past the post-apocalyptic setting and just to like acceptance almost, where people are actually learning how to thrive in this type of environment. So that's really unique in my opinion. And I haven't played 6, but I don't know, after during the World of Ruin part, are a lot of people still alive, or is everything just like completely destroyed?
Oh no, there are plenty of towns and people and so on and so forth.
But it's not exactly the same, like you're saying. You know, it's a few years later after the apocalypse, not 1,000 years later, and
right.
You know, an entirely different civilization has sort of like learned to adapt to this new reality. And you know, religions and different things that have developed since that time. It's not quite the same thing. So yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, as far as you know, we were talking about 10 it's interesting that 10 is sort of people living and coming to acceptance with the apocalypse. A game I want to touch on is 14's. The world of 14 is interesting because a lot of the lore is actually cycles, very similar to what goes on with Final Fantasy X, in that you know, you have cycles of the calm, and then you have sin being resummoned and bringing destruction across the world. When 14, they have what are called eras of they have calamities, and they have astral and umbral eras. So every couple hundred years, you'll have civilizations that thrive and flourish, and then eventually, either due to war or their technology just becoming way too advanced, they end up being wiped out. So I'm sure at this point, everyone's probably seen the absolutely amazing 14 opening, where the new opening for Realm Reborn, where Bahamut is summoned and just starts wrecking everything. Well, wasn't
that supposed to be the destruction of the vanilla Final Fantasy 14 world, and then like
yes.
Realm Reborn is supposed to be the one that comes after it?
Yes, exactly. That's called the Calamity. But within the world of Final Fantasy 14, within Hydaelyn, there have been multiple calamities. There's one where there was a huge war between black mages and white mages. There was another where there was this ridiculously advanced civilization called the Alligans. And it's kind of funny because whenever they have to explain anything that's absolutely ridiculous, they'll be like, "Oh, it's ancient Alligan technology." And at this point, now that the game is about 7 years old now, it's gotten a little ridiculous. But that's something that you see a lot is that a lot even the classes come from these old ancient civilizations that have been buried away. For example, personally, my favorite job in 14 is Scholar, and the Scholar class comes from the ancient Nemean society. And if you go to certain areas within one of the countries called Lenosia, you can see the ruins, and the what was left of their civilization. In fact, with 14, with their lore for the Nemeans, what ended up happening was they got into a war with another civilization, and they ended up infecting their people with a disease that turned them all into tomberries, the little stabby guys that everyone's afraid of. And when you end up searching in certain dungeons are based off of that ancient Nemean culture, the whole dungeon is just full of tomberries. And when you first go in there, if you're experienced with these guys, there's a lot of people, with it being an MMO, there's a lot of people who have never played a Final Fantasy game before. But then you have people like myself who've played multiple ones, and you see the tomberries, the first thing you want to do is either turn around and run, or just start flinging the strongest spells you have, because that's what you're getting into when you run the tomberries. But I'd say 14 as well also has the whole thing where the world is constantly recovering from some sort of calamity or post-apocalyptic, nigh on post-apocalyptic event of the sort. So,
yeah, Final Fantasy 14 is really the only one that I haven't played extensively. I can't wait to dive into it because the setting, like you're saying, does seem really, really, really cool. It's my kind of thing.
I'd say, for me personally, I've been playing since right around... I picked up the game a few months after Realm Reborn, around October, and I originally picked it up on the PS3, and I hated it. I could not stand it, because it was new to MMOs. In my opinion, the way it ran on the PS3, if I was running that on my computer, on my PC, I would consider the game as, not running well, and I'd uninstall it.
Sure.
But then I think PS4 came out a few months later, and I picked it up, and it was completely different, complete night and day. The game maybe runs like 20 frames per second on PS3. It's almost damn near 60 all the time on PS4. And the fact that you have a touchpad and can click around on stuff just made it so much better. Because it's still an MMO. It's a Final Fantasy game, but it's still an MMO. You need to be able to manage inventory, click on stuff, etc., etc. And it is my favorite Final Fantasy. I've talked to the other moderators here about it before, but my favorite, whenever I say my favorite Final Fantasy game, I always have to give individual categories, because I have different ones depending on what we're talking about. And so for me personally, my favorite Final Fantasy experience was the Heavensward story arc. Just because you see so much of what Final Fantasy 14 has to offer in comparison to the other games that came before. So, like, for example, do you remember the Warring Triad in Final Fantasy 6, the 3 statues that you had to do?
Yes.
And all of them show up as boss fights. And,
that's awesome.
Yeah, it's really cool. All of them show up as boss fights. They get their original names, because I think they're called Fiend, Goddess, and Devil in 6. Well, they all actually have real names, and you get to fight them in all their glory.
Don't they have
like that.
X-Death as a boss fight in FF14 now?
Yeah, I've seen that.
Man, so here's the thing with that. They do a really, really good job of, I guess, technically importing old Final Fantasy stuff. So, like, for example, the original 24-man raid for A Realm Reborn was the Crystal Tower, and it was completely remade and based off of the Crystal Tower from 3. The music was redone, the bosses were brought into the modern day. It's so incredibly well done. I personally never played 3, but I played Dissidia Duodecim, which has a lot of the music from 3 in the Crystal Tower, and so for me, it still hit on that nostalgia for me. And then with the newest raid, the newest 8-man raid, the newest Extreme Savage raids, they all have X-Death in that final stretch of Final Fantasy V.
That's
now
cool.
the difference between what they did with 3 and what they did with 8 was with the Crystal Tower and all that, they all have their own lore within Eorzea. Like, yes, it's the Crystal Tower from 3, but the Crystal Tower within Eorzea is actually an old elegant spire that they were using this Crystal Tower to absorb the energy from the sun and their satellite that they had out in space. But then with Final Fantasy, what they did with Final Fantasy V and X-Death, basically it sums it up as Omega played Final Fantasy V, and now he wants you to fight these villains from 5. It's not as well done. It's really cool that you still get to see these fights, but unfortunately, they're kind of missing their own sort of in-game lore the way 3 was done. But it's still really, really awesome. And once we're done here, I'll send you some links and some stuff I put together. You can see exactly how 14 pays homage to these old games.
That's disappointing that it's not the actual X-Death that you're fighting, because he just got sucked up by the Void, and the Void is a constant in all the games, and he could just showed back up like Gilgamesh does. Like, I'm back, and now you have to fight me and banish me to the Void again.
Yeah.
Here's the with the version of X-Death in 14, a lot of the old Final Fantasy games are actually like Eorzean fairy tales. So like Terra and Final Fantasy VI and Kefka and their stories actually exist within Eorzea, but they're fairy tales. And it's the same way with Final Fantasy V; they all exist as fairy tales. And Omega shows up within reference to Final Fantasy XIV. Omega is an old Allegan construct. He was an old Allegan death machine, more or less. And you ended up having to reactivate him because one of the enemy factions ended up summoning Shinryu. And as I think everyone here has played 5, we all know that whenever the Omega shows up, you gotta have Shinryu or vice versa. And so after they took care of Shinryu, I don't know the details of the storyline, but for whatever reason, we're fighting Omega now. Because I haven't played Stormblood, but I keep my ears to the ground. We're fighting Omega now, and Omega is basically challenging you by summoning these heroes and villains from the old tales in order for you to fight. So while it isn't technically the same X-Death from Final Fantasy V, he is X-Death from Final Fantasy V, just like remade in cyberspace by Omega. It's really weird. Like I said, they did not do a good job with incorporating the 5 lore like they did with 3, unfortunately.
But you haven't played Stormblood yet, so you don't know how the Final Fantasy Tactics lore is integrated into that one yet, do you?
Now, that one I do, actually, because, like I said, I have, personally, so I know some people may get tired of it, but I've been working on this side project where I've been comparing the lore between games. And the way they've incorporated the Tactics lore is, so far we don't know completely, because the way Tactics is incorporated as one of the 24-man raids. With the 24-man raids, they get updated every 6 months or so. So with the first leg of this 24-man raid, you start off with, what is the name of the theater troupe in Final Fantasy IX?
Tantalus.
Tantalus. Okay, yeah, they imported the Tantalus theater troupe. And the Tantalus theater troupe are a group of Garlean theater people, actors and actresses around, and they put on their performance. And the performance that they're putting on for the city of Shirogane is called the Zodiac Brave Story. So technically, the tale of Final Fantasy Tactics exists within Eorzea as, again, like Final Fantasy V, 6, and the others, as a fairy tale, or in this case, a play. But the guy who was the playwright, the person who wrote the Tactics play within the world of 14, he believes that this fairy tale was based off of real things that actually happened. And as you played, if you play Tactics, and you know that Tactics is kind of like is kind of a story that's being told to you about things that actually happened. That I think it's like a historian that's writing it or something.
Something like that. It's been a while since I played Tactics.
Yeah, I haven't played all of Tactics, so I'm a bit fuzzy on Tactics. So like, basically, the guy who wrote the play and runs theater troupe is visiting. What's the name of the city in 12? Dalmasca. Dalmasca also
or Rabanastre.
Rabanastre.
Yeah,
Dalmasca is the country.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Okay, I'm not. Like I said, I'd have to check. One of them exists in 14, either Rabanastre or Dalmasca. I think it's Rabanastre. They're visiting the city of Rabanastre because they feel like this is where the Evilise, or they feel like this is where Tactics took place at within the world of Final Fantasy XIV. So when you go there, you have to fight the invasion force or the people that are, already there in Rabanasta. And so that includes some of the summons are there. So like the fire summon is there, the water summon. These are the summons from 12. The summons are there. So you fight the fire summon, you fight the water summon. There's a brand new enemy that was designed by the guy who makes. Are you guys familiar with Garo? Like the Japanese, it's like Super Sentai. They have an anime too, but there's a Super Sentai series called Garo, and they got one of the designers to make an original boss. And you fight two of the summons, the Garo summon, then you fight. Okay, Mike, what is the name of the guy? He's one of the nobles early on in 12. I mean, in Tactics, and he's a real asshole. He's one of those guys who thinks that if you're
Algus.
I think that's his name. Where if you're
he has two different names. So Algus is his name in the PS1 version, and then they renamed him as Argath in the PSP War of the Lions version.
I think Argath is what they went with. He's the guy who's like, you're a noble, you're basically a god, and if you're anything lower than that, you're basically trash.
Yeah, that's definitely Argath or Algus.
Yeah, he shows up towards the end, and then he has some sort of demonic transformation that occurs because of the magicite that they find there, and all this sort of leads to the Final Fantasy, the Zodiac Braves playwright realizing, okay, so yeah, this stuff is true, and so like I said, we've only done the first part of the raid. In another, it's been maybe 2 months now, so in another 4-ish months. The update after next, we'll have the next part, and we'll get to see how that continues to transpire. It's really, really cool. Like I said, once we're done here, I'll send you some stuff that I put together.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm pumped to finally dive into FF14, maybe sometime next year.
Speaking of Evilist, though, I don't know if you've ever done your research, because a billion games take place in Evilist, but like I tried once to connect 12 and Tactics, and there's like no continuity lore between the two aside from that they both take place on Evilist.
It's definitely very vague, but and I think originally the idea was that they weren't going to worry too much about continuity between them, because Vagrant Story also takes place in Evilist.
Right.
But the idea is that Final Fantasy XII happened in the far distant past from Final Fantasy Tactics. So, in Final Fantasy Tactics, they talk about the world in the past where they had airships, and you have some characters that are like basically archaeologists that are sort of like discovering artifacts from the world of Final Fantasy XII and stuff like that. But yeah, they don't have like the strongest continuity ties between them, and they keep it pretty vague.
Right. There's like no cities or towns that are named the same in either game. There's no countries. There was
supposed to be some kind of calamity that happened that sort of, I guess you could call it post-apocalyptic, but it's not really the same thing. But the world of Tactics is like, almost entirely separate. That world had been forgotten almost entirely.
Yeah, which is just a tad bit disappointing, because like when they announced it, I was just like, oh, that's neat, and I just assumed there was continuity stuff like that. Then one day, for something or another, I was looking into it, and I was like, wow, there's like no real connection here. It's just they say there is.
Yeah, it's pretty much what it is.
I think that goes back into the whole thing with how different the settings are again, because like you said, after Sakaguchi left, they kind of went off in a completely different direction as far as settings go. So when Tactics came out, they were still kind of messing with I think at the time they were slowly moving away from the medieval stuff, because obviously you have 7 and 8 that came around the same time, which are more modern. But before then you still had 6 and 5, which were still for the most part kind of medieval-ish, with 6 being more cyberpunk.
Yeah, 6 is weird, but 5 is definitely medieval, except it has submarines. But
Yeah, there are certain parts in 5 that are oddly futuristic. Like, there's one part where you're basically on what looks like what could be described as like, I don't know, like a super sci-fi battleship Yamato when you're fighting like rocket launchers and stuff. I've always been kind of weird on the setting of 5. Like, so there's 3 different worlds in 5, right? And from what we know towards the end of the game, that the worlds used to be 1. So they're split into 2 different worlds, but are they split in the sense of 2 separate planets in different points in space, or are they split as in alternate dimensions? That was something that I was always kind of
they definitely both exist in space, because Galuf travels from one to the other on a meteorite.
Yeah.
But it's
okay.
yeah, they're both physical places. It's weird, but I mean it's magic. So
Yeah, Final Fantasy IV, like you were saying, it kind of touches on the same thing where you get into the lunar whale at the end, which is basically a spaceship, and you fly to the moon, and you got the Lunarians that live on the moon and everything.
they're all in cryo sleep, like
Right. That's like where Cecil and Golbez, like they're actually Lunarians and stuff. That's all revealed there. So yeah, they throw a little bit of science fiction even to some of the, at least on the Super Nintendo games, into their medieval settings.
the modern elements have always been there. Like I think with 5, you can't take 5 seriously in any regards. The game doesn't take itself seriously. Like one of the main warriors of the dawn is just a werewolf. He's just a wolf man.
Yeah, it certainly had a lighter tone to it, which I think is actually pretty interesting. When I was doing research for the retrospective video that I was going to do on it, originally it was actually supposed to be a more serious story that Sakaguchi was planning, and it was the first game that Yoshinori Kitase came on to do event planning for, so he did a lot of the cutscenes and stuff like that and some of the story direction, and he sort of injected a lot of that humor into the game, and it sort of like changed and lightened up a lot because of him. And so I was a little bit thrown off by Final Fantasy V the first time I played it, because I had just come off of beating 6, and I was like, and 4 I think too, and so I sort of had I had Final Fantasy disease, right? So I saw Final Fantasy 7 and Final Fantasy 6 and Final Fantasy 4 as being like what Final Fantasy was, because those were my exposures to it, what I knew of it, and they all told fairly dramatic stories. And so when I played 5, I was like, what is going on here? The tone of this is all over the place. But I've learned to appreciate it a lot in the years since then, especially when you take it for what it is rather than like I was doing, so what I expected it to be like the others. We're talking about how the settings are different across all of them. I think in a lot of ways, even the storytelling is also the tone sort of like shifts between games in an attempt to do something new and different. And like with 9's art direction, right? Like people were real thrown off by that, character designs and stuff like that when it came out, when you compare it to 8. So
yeah. 9 with its world full of animal people, and like compared to 8, which was all humans and realistic proportions, and definitely was a bit of a shock.
With realistic proportions, that's one of the things that kind of throws me. It throws me off when people say they're thrown off by 9, because you have 7. Just looking at the PS1 games, you have 7 where you have Lego people outside of battle, and you can kind of. I feel like most people give 7 a pass on graphics because it was their first, attempted full 3D game. So, they just worked with what they had and were very new to the technology. And then 7 comes around, 8 comes around, and they try to do the realistic proportions and have people, drawn as realistically as possible. And it just doesn't work because, it's the PlayStation 1. The graphics just aren't there yet, outside of FMVs. The FMVs, look pretty great, but, there's that meme image of Squall Renoa at the ball, and she walks up on him and she's like, "You're the best looking guy here." That's the extreme.
It like zooms in on his face, and it's just like
it's like so jacked.
Yeah, that's insane. And so then we get 9, and to me, 9 is absolutely gorgeous because they found their stride. At this point, it's 9 came out in the year 2000 or 99, around that time. And by that point, they were very familiar with the technology. They knew exactly what the PS1 could and couldn't handle. So they were able to go down sort of a middle route between squishy Lego people in realistic proportions. And you get this really beautiful chibi-esque art as far as 9 goes. And it's like, for me, in my opinion, this is what all of the PS1 games should have looked like. So for me, 9 is where, like, when people say, "Oh, I don't like the art style in 9," or "I haven't played 9 because I saw chibis," I'm like, that's what Final Fantasy on the PS1 should have been from the get-go.
Yeah, I think that the key difference between, let's say, Final Fantasy VII's overworld chibi models and Final Fantasy IX's is that especially with traditional JRPGs, so much of the game is sort of like presented through abstractions, right? So you're not meant to believe that Cloud is literally standing and waiting for the guard to shoot him before he attacks. It's an abstract way of presenting a battle, right? You're not meant to believe that Cloud is literally as tall as all the buildings in the town that he's going into while he's traveling on the world map. It's an abstract method for showing the passage of a long journey, right? That is, right. They're limited by the technology at the time. So much, like mini games, there's all kinds of things that are meant to be abstractions or abstract ways of presenting ideas. And so I don't think anyone looked at the Lego models and said, well, Cloud is a Lego man, because again, it's an abstraction. And you look at his concept art and you look at his model in the battles and you look at his model in the FMVs, it's clear that that's how the character's meant to look. Versus in Final Fantasy IX, where the models on regular exploration and in battles and in the FMVs and in the concept art are all uniform. They're consistent. So we're meant to believe that Steiner has eyes that are like like a whole foot in diameter, you know what I mean? And that Braun is supposed to be like a 1,000-pound woman, and so the art direction is consistent with the representation. It's not an abstraction in Final Fantasy IX, and in Final Fantasy VII it was. So I can understand why people don't like the art direction of FF9. For a little while, I was kind of the same way, but I think it's the same issue people had with like Wind Waker, for instance, right? You have this idea of what you think Zelda is or what you think Final Fantasy is, tone-wise. But when you actually dive into the game and you realize this is not the same kind of story as Final Fantasy VIII or Final Fantasy VII is, or even Final Fantasy VI. This is a more lighthearted adventure. It takes on a totally different tone and atmosphere to it. The art starts to make sense. It starts to, because, this is a conversation I've had with a lot of people too. Even with Final Fantasy VII, the way that they animate the characters when they're doing their scenes that are not FMVs, when you're just kind of clicking through dialogue boxes, the big animations that they do to express emotion, that kind of thing doesn't work when you move to a strictly realistic, sort of aesthetic like they're doing with the Final Fantasy VII remake. Like, they're not going to have them. I don't know if you guys remember the animation, but they have them jump a lot from place to place. So they'll be at the door at Tifa's 7th Heaven Bar. They'll jump all the way over into the arcade elevator and go down there, and they'll jump down the stairs and they'll jump over here. These big, huge animations. There's no way that works in the Final Fantasy VII remake. And it actually is going to be a challenge, I feel, to capture the charm that comes with working within those limitations to express and emote with the characters. Now, it's much easier to do that when your art style is congruent with that style in the first place. So I actually agree with you to a certain extent, Vaughn, in that with the limitations of the PS1 and what it could do, the art style really is congruent in Final Fantasy IX with that kind of animation and emoting and that charm that comes with the limitations of its hardware.
Right.
Because of that, I think Final Fantasy IX's art works really, really, really well. But if you were coming fresh off of FF8, and that's your first experience with Final Fantasy, and then you see the art of FF9, I can see so many people going what is this? Because you expect a story like FF8, because that's what you know. So
I actually did that, went from 8 to 9. 8 was my first, and then 9 was my second. The art style didn't bother me. What bothered me is I've talked to Vaughn and some of the others about this. I was a kid. I think I beat Final Fantasy 8 when I was in 5th grade, so 9 was around there. But I got really confused over the concept of MP, because I was used to 8 and the draw system, and I had no idea what was going on. I was casting fire, and it still had the 5 next to it, and I was like, what is this?
That's pretty good.
It's
yeah,
really
we
freaking funny.
All right. Well, yeah, I think that's pretty. I think we got a pretty good thing in there on the settings. I wanted to go. So at this point, I want to talk a little bit about some of the things you may have seen on the subreddit recently. Might have piqued your interest. Like, for example, we talked about 5 earlier. Apparently, a few days ago was the 25th anniversary of 5, which I didn't really get to say much on 5 myself earlier, but 5 is one of my personal favorites.
I love 5. It is coincidentally my 5th favorite Final Fantasy.
Yeah, I think I put 7 right behind 5 for me personally. Like I was talking to you earlier about this, Mike, the other day. You know, I play these games for the power fantasy, and when you get into the different kind of combinations you can hit with Final Fantasy 5, talking about S slash or
X slash, yeah. You can become OPAF in Final Fantasy 5.
Yes, it's ridiculous. It just feels so good. But yeah, apparently 5's 25th anniversary was a few days ago, and I saw some neat little art on 5 earlier.
I saw something on 5 earlier about like a Bart's and Lena ship, and I was like, that person did not play 5 because there is no romance in Final Fantasy 5. Galef and Bart's creep on Ferris and think she's a really beautiful, but like that's it.
Part is so funny, yo. I love that part where Ferris is sleeping and everyone walks in the room and they get these huge heart eyes. And I'm like, what is everyone doing? Why are they like freaking out over Ferris? And then, they make the reveal that, oh, she's a chick. And I think Annie made the point earlier that Ferris is one of the first female characters in the franchise where she's not really she's not the waifu type. Like she's a strong, independent pirate woman who doesn't need no party. You know what I'm saying? Like Ferris is great. She's one of my personal favorite characters just because I really like that strong woman archetype, which is something that we talked about Luna Freya earlier and how they wanted Luna Freya to be a strong woman. I feel like they kind of missed the mark with Luna. In fact, do you guys remember before the game even came out, there was a Luna Freya trailer that was maybe like 30 seconds long with them with her sitting in, I guess it was a room in Venice, whatever the name of the city was, and they had all the Niflheim guards pointing the guns in her face, and
yep.
And she got up and she was moving the guns out of their face, and I guess the trailer was meant to show that Luna was this really strong woman, but instead I felt it was just kind of cringy to a degree. Just kind of missed the mark, sort of.
Yeah, I think that they cut a lot of the content that they had planned originally with Luna. Maybe it had even been implemented back when she was still Stella, but I know that there was some abuse, I guess, that they sort of like touched on a bit with her being beaten, that they were sort of afraid that would be taken the wrong way, so they took it out. But yeah, there's kind of a lot with Luna that they altered for the final version that they changed.
It's that, and right now we've got the weekly discussion going on for again, I was thinking about the class combos for 5, but the class combos for 12, that the Zodiac Age is out now, and you've got the Zodiac Age, you can choose 2 jobs. See, I'm not an expert on 12. It's honestly
so Zodiac Age is based on the international version. In the international version, everyone could get 1 job. There were still 12 total, but everyone could only pick 1, so it was to encourage multiple playthroughs. But in the Zodiac, they just let you pick a second job, so you could have combinations. And it's, I don't know if the combos really work as well. Like, they don't really give you unique characters as just giving you more stat boosts.
Yeah, one thing that was really cool about the international version was that the original game, so the base game with the license board the way it was, it made it so that every character could just do everything. You max it out, and every character can be a white mage and a black mage and a melee fighter or DPS or tank or whatever. Like, every single character fit every role. There wasn't really like any differentiation between them if you wanted to. I mean, you could limit yourself if you wanted to, but the point is that the international version was supposed to address that, so that you had to make choices and build a party that sort of complemented each other. And they limited that by only allowing each character to choose 1 job. But I feel like the Zodiac Age diminishes that choice to some degree, because I could pick whatever job it is that I want for this character, but then the weaknesses that come with that class, I can just subvert those by picking another job that sort of like makes up for that. So if I picked a job that doesn't get a lot of HP boosts, I can just choose Monk as my second, and then I get all that HP within that class that, you know, so you sort of like you can sort of get rid of the weaknesses aspect. So it's not anymore about like building this team that this character is here to supplement this character's class. It's like, yeah, they sort of like did away with that to a degree with Zodiac Age, which I wasn't a fan of, but you could always just choose not to have the second class in Zodiac Age if you want.
Yeah, so that was kind of my issue with 12's not Gambit 4, but what's the board called?
The license board.
License board.
Yeah, I'm personally not a fan of the license board, mostly because, and I think maybe this is the Final Fantasy disease again. At the time, I had played 7, 8, 13, and maybe 9. I think I had maybe gotten around to 9 by that time. And so when I was playing 12 and I hit the license board, excuse me, and I was going through the board, I think within maybe the first 3 or 4 hours, I had unlocked tier 3 black magic. So stuff like, Firaga, Thundaga, etc., etc. I did not really understand that at the time, these were actual licenses for the spells and not the spells themselves. So I was really, really put off when I realized, when I thought, oh, hey, I've got all this, I'm only 3 hours in, I've got all this dope magic. It's like, no, you have to find it. Which, to be fair, 5 does something similar to where you don't actually get the spells until you purchase them. But at least with 5, it's not sort of like a board sort of thing. It's not so much in your face. It's a level progression sort of thing. But with for me at least, when I was playing 12, I believed that I was unlocking these skills, and so the license board actually has, as far as RPG progression systems go, in my opinion, it has some of the least amount of progression, because you're actually just getting, aside from stat boosts and getting the license to equip different gear, it's really just licenses and gear. There's no actual progression within the board itself. So that was kind of an issue I always had with 12.
It's kind of a strange idea too, right? Because the idea is, in the world, in any ways, that you're buying a license to be able to use that weapon. To be able to.
Right, it's
you
weird.
You don't actually have to go into town and purchase the license. You can just I have this license now while you're out in the middle of the desert somewhere. And if you have that sword on you, it's like, now I'm allowed to. It's, an interesting concept, I guess, that sort of is meant to reinforce this idea that this empire has moved in and sort of regimenting everything. But I think they could have gone an extra step to make that make more sense, but that might have been even more,
But it's also weird. You have to buy licenses to use the espers and stuff, and is the Empire really gonna crack down on people for summoning mystical demons?
Hold on a second. Do you have a license to summon that fire monster? I don't think so.
You're coming with me, sir. Now, Emily, what about 12? And if you have, what are some of your favorite class combinations? What are some of the combinations you like in 12?
I haven't played 12, so pass.
Okay.
12 is one of the best.
Yeah, I know.
like 12.
There's a lot of good ones I haven't played. I'm not going to list them out because, you guys know, I just don't want to be called out on it. I have a list of games that I'm trying to get through. Right now I'm on 2, and it is a bit of a struggle. I've been on it for 3 months now, so about halfway through. After that one's done, then I can move on to 4.
Most people would consider Final Fantasy 2 to be the worst Final Fantasy game.
I think they would too. And the thing is, I think 2 gets too much hate, honestly. Maybe because I just went in with the worst expectations ever. I thought it was going to be complete garbage before I started playing it, because that's what everyone says it is. It's really not that bad. It's really not that bad. I'm personally, and this is going to be a super controversial opinion, but I'm kind of even enjoying it more than 1, just because just because 2.
I don't
actually,
disagree.
I
just think it's interesting.
Yeah, when you think about it, I think 1 gets a pass because it's the first, and I think no one's really gonna hate on it. But 2, I think, has a better story.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, 2 actually has a good story. It actually has characters, which 1 really didn't. It had a few side characters, but not really. 2 actually has a main cast, and I think the biggest criticism of 2 is obviously the progression system with your characters and how you level them up. But I can at least appreciate like them giving you options on how you want to like progress your characters. Whereas in 1, they just kind of level up. Like you can choose jobs in the beginning, but after that, there's really no customization at all. Like at least 2 is trying to let you customize. And I think, and after that, they had 3, which introduced the job system. Like, I mean, I'm enjoying switching around the weapons and seeing, what works best. It's a very broken system, of course. I don't enjoy having to hit myself in battle in order to get more HP. But, I mean, I'm enjoying it more than I did 1, honestly.
Yeah,
Okay.
I actually like Final Fantasy 2. Final Fantasy 2 is not my least favorite. And I love the idea of the progression system. I think it's too bad that you can, break it and take advantage of it the way that it is. I think with a little bit more thought into it. But the idea of it is so intuitive and makes sense. Why, when I level up, am I becoming a stronger mage if all I'm doing is attacking with spears and swords and stuff? That doesn't make any sense. Like you should progress with what you actually practice. I love the idea of that progression system. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think it led into it's been a while since I played 3, but I think the more time you spend in each job, you get to earn AP for that job. Yeah, and I think it was a good. I don't know how to describe it. Like Final Fantasy 2 was a good precursor to progression systems in later Final Fantasy games, where the more you work with something, the better at it you become. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, Final Fantasy 2 isn't that bad. I don't think people should be as scared of it as they are. Yeah, it's not the least favorite one I've ever played. So
the only thing I can say that I detest in Final Fantasy 2 is the encounter rate, which is just off the charts. It's just ridiculous. It's
one thing that Final Fantasy 2 does, which I really don't like. I mean, it doesn't really have a lot of like walls to keep you from wandering, but they have like a like I remember in the beginning you get put in this big open world and I was like, oh cool, like let's just go explore, and I went past a certain point and all of a sudden the enemies were like a million times better than I was, and I was like, okay, like not supposed to go there. Like you just have to figure out where you're supposed to go based on like how hard the enemies are, and you end up like dying a lot. At least that's what I did. Like I kind of miss them just having like a mountain or some sort of barrier, like, oh, you can't go through there, you need an airship or you need a submarine or something. Like wasn't a huge fan of the levels using that to kind of section you off, but again, like they were trying new stuff, so I give it a pass.
Now we're getting towards the end of our podcast for today. I think the last thing I wanted to go over with you guys was the character contest. So at this point in time,
I don't know when we're going to publish this, but at this point we're at the end of round 4, I think.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
it will be done by the time this comes out, right?
Yeah.
There's a good chance of that.
So at this point in time, we have Tifa versus Kuja, and Tifa is, she's got a pretty good lead on Kuja. She's sitting at almost 57% over Kuja. So it's not looking good. It's not looking good for the what are they called? What do the monkey people call it? 9
Genome sounds right.
Yeah, genomes.
Looking, but I think a lot of people probably saw that coming. Tifa would probably beat out Kuja. Like Kuja's definitely one of the fan favorite villains, but everyone loves Tifa.
Yeah.
I mean, Tifa beat Cloud. Like that's pretty impressive.
That is very impressive.
Yeah, I mean, just because obviously people like Tifa, but Cloud is like
Cloud.
He's like the face of the franchise.
And then we have Red versus Bash von Rosenberg from 12. Is that the one where is that the dude where you went around in 12 yelling his name?
Yeah, you pretended to be him. I'm Captain Bash.
Yeah, so he was supposed to be dead or what, and so Von is going around trying to proclaim he still lives and pretending that he is Captain Bash. Captain Bosch.
Right. Right now, Red 13 has just barely
2 votes.
Gotten it. Yeah, Red is sitting at 50.6%, and Bosch is sitting at 49.4%.
87 to 85. That one can change before it's over.
Left. And it may, it could very well change.
botched it as far as he did, honestly. I mean,
I'm surprised Red made it as far as he did. Both of these characters I didn't
but
expect to be at this
maybe
point.
They just had an easy path or something. I don't know. Those were two that kind of surprised me.
Red beat X-Death, who I was surprised by. Red also beat Aerith. Like,
Wow.
Yeah, that's true. That was a big one.
yeah, that was a big shocker.
Next is Vivi versus Sid.
That's going about as well as you expect.
Yeah, Vivi's a fan favorite. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if he ended up taking it all. Right now, Vivi is sitting at 70.6% of the vote.
Oh
So,
my gosh.
so there's no coming back for Sid there. And then last but not least, we have Squall versus Celis. And, Squall has main character armor, so, he was going to make it far. Celis, while not a main character, well, technically, you want to get technical about it, 6 doesn't have a main character, even though it's very obviously Terra for the first half and
Cells for the second half.
yeah, but Celis, Celis is also a fan favorite. So right now we're sitting at 51.4% for Celis. So it could easily, it could very well move over to Squall by the end of the.
Squall was winning till I think like midday yesterday or something like that, but it's been close. It's 5 vote difference, 89 to 84 right now. Could also change, especially when I announce the Discord tonight to go vote like I've done every week. I'm not happy with the totals.
Don't you do it!
I'm doing it right now.
There's no announcement.
Don't forget to vote in the character contest. Tonight's the last one.
Vote tonight or tomorrow?
Technically, it's a Monday through Thursday thing, but I always, 9 times out of 10, forget to take it down in the morning. So they usually have till I get lunch or when I go home.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, that's the way the character contest is looking now. So there's one more week after this? 2 more weeks?
Next week is round 5, and then the semifinals, and then the finals. So we got 3 more weeks, and we're streamlining it because we want to get it done before New Year's, because then we're going to announce this podcast then, other stuff, the Let's Plays. I don't know if we announced the tabletop stuff yet. We can announce we're talking about it, so we're not ready for that one.
Well, all right. I think that more or less wraps things up. Mike, I definitely want to thank you again for stopping by and hanging out with us. It's been super fun.
Oh yeah, everyone who listens to this, go watch Dark Pixel Gaming. I'm not gonna lie, I'd never seen any of your videos before we got in contact with you, and then I looked up one of your 10-part 2-hour-long episode 13 series, and I watched one of them, and I was like, that was really good, but I don't have the time investment to watch it all. But
Yeah,
quality content.
So, appreciate it. So what the video series that he's referencing is a discussion series. So what I do is I do these reviews / retrospectives of the Final Fantasy games, but preceding that or leading up to it, I'll do a series of videos that are meant to be discussions where I'll take feedback from the comments and from the people watching, the audience, and I'll sort of consider that and take that perspective and then also sort of insert it into my reviews themselves, because I don't want to use a persuasive voice, more or less, when I do my reviews. I'm kind of trying to say, if you're this kind of player, or if you're into this kind of Final Fantasy, you may like this or that, but if you're not, then maybe you won't so much. So I kind of want to let the audience decide from themselves what they think about everything. So that series was meant for me to get as much perspective on a game that I'm not the biggest fan of myself personally, so that I'll be able to insert some more of those positive perspectives on the game into the final review, so that it can feel fair and balanced. So, but yeah, the reviews themselves are what the channel is sort of centered on or built for.
Yeah, the 13 retrospectives and the discussion on it has been really, really interesting. Like I said, 13 is one of my personal favorites, and you even featured some of my audio for the battle system episode, which is one of my favorite parts of 13. I'm not going to sit here and argue with you about things as far as the characters or the writing goes, because while admittedly for me personally, while admittedly they may not be the best or worst, that's not what I was there for. I personally enjoy those games for the sci-fi aesthetic. And now I think about it, I don't think I ever even got to mention it when we were talking about the settings. But I'm there for the sci-fi aesthetic and the sleek battle system. But yeah, you definitely go check out Mike's channel and his current. Well, at the time of recording, you're still in the middle. Or have you wrapped it up yet? You're about done. If you haven't wrapped it up yet,
I finished the discussion series, and I'm really hoping to have the review finished before the end of the year. That's a little bit ambitious. We'll see what happens. But if this goes up first week of January or something, then it should be around that time at least that I'm getting prepared to release the full review and retrospective of the game. So,
okay, yeah. Yeah, it sounds like they'll probably be coming out around the same time then.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, all right. Yeah, again, I think that wraps things up for this episode.
right.
Again, like Dino said, thanks everyone for listening and hanging out with us, and stay tuned because we'll have more in the future.
Yeah, we're hoping for 2 a month. We'll see how it goes, and don't forget to check out Dark Pixel Gaming. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight, Mike.
Oh, thank you guys. It's been a lot of fun. Appreciate it.
All right. Until next time.